I stood frozen in the Johnson family's grand foyer, my worn black purse clutched to my chest. Through the arched doorway, I could hear my husband Brian's mother, Chalia, speaking in hushed tones that weren't quite hushed enough. She dresses like a church volunteer. Brian must be desperate. Then Andrew's voice, steady and dismissive. She's simple. Be patient with her. Different backgrounds, that's all. Then they switched to Japanese, assuming I wouldn't understand. She looks like a maid. Brian married beneath him. We need to convince him to fix this embarrassment. My name is Karen Johnson. I'm 56 years old, and 2 years ago, I won $38 million. But Brian and his entire family don't know a thing. And tonight, I was about to discover exactly what kind of people raised my husband. Before I continue, don't forget to like this video and leave a comment below telling me where you're watching from. Thank you. Now, you might wonder why a woman sitting on a multi-million-dollar fortune would drive a 2012 Toyota Corolla and shop at thrift stores. It started 2 years ago, when that lottery ticket changed everything. I'm a simple Christian woman from Ridgewood Village, New Jersey. I grew up with nothing, learned to appreciate everything, and never forgot where I came from. When those numbers hit, I made a choice. I kept working at the church, kept my floral dresses from Goodwill, kept living the life God had given me before the money. Because I learned something important early in life. Blessings aren't meant to change who you are. They're meant to reveal who others really are. What Brian didn't know was that his disastrous investment that wiped out our savings, I'd been quietly covering it for months. The mortgage he thought we were barely making, paid in full. The credit cards maxing out, cleared. I watched my husband struggle with shame, too afraid to tell his family the truth, while I used my secret blessing to keep us afloat. When his parents finally demanded to meet me, Brian pulled me aside with desperate eyes. Please don't embarrass me, Karen. My family has very high standards. So I decided to play along. I dressed even simpler than usual, drove my old Corolla to Boston, and walked into that mansion with nothing but kindness and a whole lot of curiosity about the people who shaped the man I married. What I didn't expect was to discover that the standards they kept talking about were built on a foundation of debt, lies, and a crumbling empire they were desperate to hide. The door swung open before I could knock. Chalia Johnson stood there, tall and elegant in a cream silk blouse that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Her eyes swept over me, starting at my worn flats, traveling up my floral dress, landing on my old black purse, and something flickered across her face. Not quite disgust, more like disappointment. Karen. She didn't smile. Do come in. The foyer was massive. Marble floors, a crystal chandelier, oil paintings in gilded frames. I stepped inside, clutching my purse, and immediately felt a dozen pairs of eyes on me. Silence. Then someone coughed. Another person shifted, and I heard it, the unmistakable sound of a smirk being swallowed. Everyone, Shalia announced, her voice tight. This is Karen, Brian's wife. Andrew Johnson rose from a leather armchair like a king, acknowledging a peasant. Tall, silver-haired, with a kind of posture that screamed old money. He extended his hand, but his eyes were already judging. We expected someone different, he said. I shook his hand gently. Different how? Oh, you know, he waved dismissively. Brian spoke so highly of you. We thought perhaps... He stopped himself, but the damage was done. Aunt Lorraine, a woman drowning in pearls and perfume, let out a sharp laugh behind her hand. That purse is darling. Vintage, just old, I said with a smile. More laughter. This time, no one bothered hiding it. Brian appeared at my side, his face flushed. Mom, Dad, thank you for having us. Of course, dear. Shalia touched his arm but didn't look at me. Come, let's sit. Dinner will be ready soon. They seated me at the far end of the table. Not beside Brian. Not near anyone, really. Like I was an afterthought. A stranger who'd wandered in by mistake. Throughout dinner, the questions came like tiny knives. So, Karen, what do you do for work? Aunt Lorraine asked. eyebrows raised. I volunteer at our church. Help with community outreach. Oh. Her smile was patronizing. So you don't work? I work plenty. Just not for money. Andrew leaned forward. And before Brian, what did you do? Housekeeping, mostly. Cleaning offices. It was honest work. I watched their faces. The exchanged glances. The barely concealed judgment. One of the cousins whispered to another, loud enough for me to hear, "Goodwill dresses and a cleaning lady passed." Brian really outdid himself. I folded my hands in my lap and smiled. Brian shifted uncomfortably beside me, pretending not to hear. But I saw his jaw tighten. I saw the shame creeping into his eyes. "Karen," Chalia said, her tone dripping with false sweetness, "you must feel quite overwhelmed. This lifestyle, these expectations, it's very different from what you're used to." "Actually," I said softly, "I'm just grateful to meet the people who raised Brian. Family is everything." The table went quiet, not the good kind. After dinner, I excused myself to find the restroom. The hallway stretched long and shadowed, lined with family portraits, generations of Johnsons staring down at me with the same cold eyes I'd seen tonight. I passed a study. The door was cracked open, and then I heard it. Japanese. Fluid, rapid, confident. They thought they were safe. I stopped. My hand froze on the hallway wall. Andrew's voice. "She's exactly what we feared. No class. No sophistication." "Chalia, Brian married a maid. How do we fix this?" "Aunt Lorraine. If she drags him down further, we'll lose everything." My chest tightened, but my face stayed calm. Because 25 years ago, I spent 18 months on a church mission trip in Osaka. I learned Japanese serving families who didn't speak English. I learned it to share the gospel. I learned it to love people who felt forgotten. And tonight, I understood every single word. I stood there in the dim hallway, listening to them tear me apart in a language they thought was their secret weapon. Then, I smoothed my dress, lifted my chin, and walked back into the living room. Smiling, I stood just outside the study door, hidden by shadows, my heart pounding so loud I thought they'd hear it. But they didn't stop talking. Andrew's voice was calm, clinical. "Brian made a terrible mistake. This woman will ruin what's left of our name. She doesn't even try to fit in," Chalia added. "Look at her clothes. Look at how she speaks. She's an embarrassment." Aunt Lorraine laughed sharp and cruel. "Does she even understand what this family represents? Generations of legacy. And Brian brings home that?" "We have to be careful," Andrew said. "If we push too hard, Brian might rebel. But we're running out of time. The house, the investments, everything is falling apart. Brian needs to marry someone with money. Real money. Not a church volunteer who probably clips coupons." My fingernails dug into my palms. "Do you think she knows?" Shalia asked. "About Brian's debts?" "Of course not. She's too simple. Brian said she thinks they're just tight on money. She has no idea how bad it really is." "Good," Andrew said. "Let's keep it that way. The less she knows, the easier it will be to convince Brian to leave her. Once he realizes he's married to dead weight, he'll understand." I closed my eyes. Dead weight. For a moment, I was 25 again, standing in a small church in Osaka, stumbling through my first Japanese sentences, surrounded by families who welcomed me with open arms, despite my broken words. I learned their language because I wanted to serve them, to understand them, to show them they mattered. And now, decades later, that same gift was showing me the truth about the family I'd married into. "She probably doesn't even know we're talking about her," Aunt Lorraine said, laughing. "Look at her face out there, so sweet, so clueless. Brian married a fool." I opened my eyes, took a breath, and whispered to myself, in perfect Japanese, "You have no idea. I understand every word." Then I turned and walked back into the living room, my worn flats silent on the marble floor. Brian looked up when I entered, his face still tight with stress. "You okay?" "Perfect," I said, sitting down beside him. I reached for his hand and squeezed it gently. Your family is lovely. Chalia glided back into the room moments later, her smile as fake as the warmth in her voice. Karen, dear, we were just discussing plans for tomorrow. Perhaps you'd like to rest? I'm sure all this is exhausting for you. I'm fine, I said sweetly. I'm used to long days. Andrew joined us, drink in hand. Karen, I'm curious. Have you traveled much? Seen the world? A bit. I spent time in Japan years ago. Beautiful country. His eyebrow raised slightly. Japan? For vacation? Mission work. Actually, lived there for over a year. The room shifted. Just barely. A flicker of something concern crossed Chalia's face. Did you pick up any of the language? Aunt Lorraine asked, too casually. I smiled. Oh, just a few phrases here and there. Nothing useful. Relief washed over their faces. They thought I was harmless, ignorant, too simple to be a threat. I sat there, holding Brian's hand, watching them relax back into their masks of superiority, and I realized something profound. They weren't just hiding their cruelty. They were hiding their desperation, and I was about to find out just how desperate they really were. That night, back in the guest room, Brian finally broke. I'm sorry, he whispered, sitting on the edge of the bed, head in his hands. I'm so sorry you had to deal with them tonight. I sat beside him, my hand on his back. Brian, what's really going on? He looked up, eyes red. What do you mean? Your family. They're tense, stressed. This isn't just about me being different, is it? He was quiet for a long time. Then it all came out. Karen, I didn't just lose some money. His voice cracked. I lost everything. The retirement fund, our savings, everything we built. That investment I told you about, it wasn't a small mistake. It was catastrophic. How bad? I asked gently. 6 figures. Gone. And my parents. He stopped, swallowed hard. They told me not to scare you with the details. They said you're all ready. They said you wouldn't understand. My heart sank. What else did they say? That I need to fix this. That I need to... He couldn't finish. But I knew. I'd heard them. Brian needs to leave her. Brian needs to marry money. They're ashamed of me, he continued. Ashamed I failed. Ashamed I married you. They think I've ruined everything. I took his hand. And what do you think? I think I'm drowning, Karen, and I don't know how to save us. What he didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that we weren't drowning. I'd been bailing water for months. The mortgage he thought we were barely scraping together paid off completely 3 months ago. The credit cards maxing out cleared. Every single one. The late payment notices piling up, handled, quietly, carefully. I'd even funded his last-ditch attempt to recover the investment, watching him pour borrowed money into a failing venture because I couldn't let him lose hope entirely. And through it all, he never asked where the money came from. He just assumed I was good at managing. Brian stood, pacing the room. My parents think you're dragging me down. They want me to focus on rebuilding, on finding opportunities, on leaving me. He stopped, turned. I would never, but they want you to. Silence. He didn't deny it. I felt something crack inside me. Not anger, not even hurt, just clarity. The man I married was terrified, broken, and too ashamed to see that the woman he was protecting was the only one actually protecting him. Brian, I said softly, do you trust me? Of course. Then trust me when I say we're going to be fine, no matter what your family thinks. He nodded, but his eyes were distant, haunted. I let him sleep, but I couldn't. Around midnight, I heard voices again, downstairs. I crept to the staircase and listened. Andrew's voice, frustrated. We can't wait much longer. The house payment is due in 3 weeks. If Brian doesn't come through, then we push harder, Chalia said. We convince him that Karen is the problem, that she's keeping him from success, that he needs to make a choice. And if he refuses, then we cut him off completely. Let him fall. Eventually, he'll see we were right. I stood there in the darkness, my worn nightgown brushing the floor, and I realized something. They weren't just trying to destroy me. They were willing to destroy their own son to save themselves. And suddenly, I knew exactly what I had to do. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. The house was quiet, too quiet, like a museum after hours. I slipped on my cardigan and walked downstairs, drawn by the faint sound of voices coming from Andrew's study. The door was open, just a crack. I shouldn't have listened. But after everything I'd heard, I needed to understand the full picture. 3 weeks, Chilia. That's all we have. Andrew's voice was strained, desperate. Nothing like the controlled tone he used in public. The third mortgage payment? Yes. And the investment portfolio? It's not recovering. It's gone. Completely liquidated last month just to cover the credit lines. I heard papers shuffling. What about the retirement accounts? Chilia asked, her voice thin. Drained. We've been pulling from them for 2 years. There's maybe 40,000 left. That's it. Silence. How did we get here, Andrew? The same way everyone gets here. Bad decisions. Pride. Refusing to downsize when we should have. Keeping up appearances we couldn't afford. He laughed bitterly. The Johnson name. The Johnson legacy. What a joke. Don't say that. It's true. We're broke, Chilia. Completely broke. This house, the cars, the club memberships, it's all smoke and mirrors. We've been pretending for so long. I almost forgot we were pretending. My hand covered my mouth. That's why we need Brian, Chalia said firmly. If he divorces Karen and marries someone with real money, someone from the Aldridge family or the Westcotts, we can recover. He can recover. It's the only way. And if he refuses, then we lose everything. The house goes into foreclosure. Our name becomes a punchline. Everything our family built for generations, gone. Andrew's voice dropped. Maybe we deserve it. Stop. We can fix this. We just need Brian to see reason. To see that Karen is dead weight. I know. You've said it 100 times. I stepped back from the door, my heart racing. They weren't just snobs. They weren't just cruel. They were drowning. And they wanted to use my husband as a life raft. Later that morning, at the formal family brunch, I watched them perform. That's what it was, a performance. Chalia, in her designer dress that was probably bought on credit. Andrew in his tailored suit, playing the patriarch. Aunt Lorraine dripping in jewelry that might have been paste for all I knew. And me, sitting at the far end of the table in my floral dress and old cardigan, clutching my black purse like a shield. The whispers started immediately. Is she wearing the same dress from yesterday? Maybe she only owns 2. Someone should tell her this is a formal brunch. Hands flew to mouths. Giggles erupted. Eyes darted to me and then away, like I was something embarrassing they'd rather ignore. Brian sat beside me, his face flushed, his hands clenched under the table. One of the younger cousins leaned to another and said, loud enough for half the table to hear, "She looks like she works here. Should we tip her?" Laughter exploded. I felt myself shrinking, my shoulders curving inward, my grip tightening on my purse. This was the image they wanted, the poor, embarrassed wife. The woman who didn't belong. The burden. But something inside me shifted. I looked around the table at their perfectly styled hair, their designer clothes, their practiced smiles. And I saw it clearly now. They were the ones performing, desperate, terrified, clinging to an illusion that was crumbling beneath them. I was the only real person in the room. Chalia cleared her throat. Karen, dear, we have some wonderful news. The Aldridge family is hosting a charity gala next month. Very exclusive. We'd love for Brian to attend. She paused. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable staying home? The table went silent, waiting. Brian's jaw tightened. I smiled softly. Actually, that sounds lovely. I'd love to go. Chalia's smile faltered. Oh, well, it's quite formal. The dress code is... I'm sure I'll manage. Andrew set down his coffee cup a little too hard. Karen, these events require a certain presentation. We wouldn't want you to feel out of place. I appreciate your concern, I said evenly, but I'll be fine. The tension was thick enough to cut. Aunt Lorraine laughed nervously. Well, isn't she confident? That's sweet. More giggles, more glances. I looked at each of them, really looked, and I saw it all clearly now. The desperation behind Andrew's control, the fear behind Chalia's coldness, the cruelty covering their shame. They weren't better than me. They were poorer than I'd ever been, not in money, in spirit, in character, in soul. And I was done collecting information. It was time they learned the truth. The formal luncheon was held in the dining room under the crystal chandelier, sunlight streaming through tall windows that overlooked manicured gardens. The table was set with china so delicate it looked like it would shatter if you breathed on it. Everyone was dressed immaculately. Chalia in navy silk, Andrew in a pressed white shirt, Aunt Lorraine dripping in pearls, the cousins in their designer dresses and tailored blazers, and then there was me. Same floral dress, same worn cardigan, same black purse resting on my lap. I saw the looks the moment I entered. The barely concealed disgust, the pity, the amusement. Someone whispered, "Did she bring that purse to a formal luncheon?" Another voice, "Maybe she keeps her coupons in it." Laughter, muffled behind hands. Brian sat beside me, rigid, his face pale. He reached for my hand under the table and squeezed. An apology, a plea. Chalia raised her glass. To family, and to new beginnings. Everyone echoed the toast. Except me. I watched them, studied them. Aunt Lorraine leaned toward one of the cousins and whispered in Japanese, "She has no idea how ridiculous she looks." The cousin responded, "I can't believe Brian brought her here. She's embarrassing." Andrew, from across the table, added in Japanese, "This is exactly why we need to convince him to leave her. Look at her. She doesn't belong." My chest tightened, but my face stayed calm. Then someone said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Karen, dear, you look so comfortable, like you work here." The table erupted in laughter. Brian's hand tightened on mine. "Stop." "Oh, Brian, we're just teasing," Aunt Lorraine said, still giggling. "Karen knows we're joking. Don't you, dear?" I set down my fork, stood slowly. Every eye in the room turned to me. And then, in perfect, fluent Japanese, I said, "Anata tachi no yendobo, trenbu kikoete imasu." The room froze. You could have heard a pin drop. Chalia's face went white. Andrew's glass stopped halfway to his lips. Aunt Lorraine's mouth fell open. I continued in Japanese, my voice steady and clear. "For 2 days, I've listened to you mock me, insult me, plan my husband's divorce, all in a language you thought I couldn't understand." Gasps echoed around the table. I switched to English, looking directly at Chalia. "You called me a maid. You said I embarrassed the Johnson name. You said Brian married beneath him." I turned to Andrew. "You said I was dead weight, that Brian needed to leave me to save himself, that I was too simple to understand what was happening." I looked at Aunt Lorraine. "You laughed at my clothes, my purse, my background. You treated me like I was less than human." Hands flew to mouths. Faces flushed red with shame. Brian stood, his chair scraping loudly. "You said what?" "Brian," Chalia started. "No." His voice shook with fury. "You told me to bring her here, to introduce her, and you spent the entire time tearing her apart behind her back?" "We were protecting you," Andrew said weakly. "From what? From the woman who stood by me through everything?" I placed a hand on Brian's arm. "It's okay. It's not okay, Karen." I looked around the table at their shocked, ashamed faces. "You judged me by my clothes," I said softly. "By my car, by my purse, by my background. You assumed I was ignorant, simple, beneath you." I paused. "But I judged you by your character, and I found you lacking." Silence. Then Chalia, her voice trembling. "Karen, we didn't mean—" "Yes, you did. You meant every word." I reached for my purse. "But there's something else you should know." I opened it slowly. "Something I've been keeping to myself for 2 years now." Andrew's face went pale. "What are you talking about?" I smiled. "Everything." I reached into my old black purse, the one they'd mocked, the one they'd laughed at, and pulled out a single envelope. Worn, creased, yellowed at the edges. I placed it gently on the white tablecloth. "2 years ago," I began, my voice steady, "I bought a lottery ticket at the gas station near our church. One ticket, $2. The room was silent. I picked the numbers based on Bible verses. Completely random. Completely ordinary." I paused. "And I won $38 million. You could have heard a heartbeat." Chalia's hand went to her throat. Andrew's face drained of color. Aunt Lorraine looked like she might faint. "I didn't tell anyone," I continued. "Not my friends. Not my church. Not even Brian. Because I wanted to see what money would do to people. How it would change them. How it would change me." I looked directly at Chalia. "I kept living in our small house. Kept driving my 2012 Corolla. Kept shopping at thrift stores. Because I didn't want the blessing to become a curse. From my purse, I pulled out bank statements, financial documents, proof. I laid them on the table, one by one. When Brian made his investment mistake and lost everything, I didn't panic. I quietly paid off our mortgage. 3 months ago, paid in full." Brian's face went white. I cleared every credit card, every late payment, every debt collector that called our house. I pulled out more documents. I even funded his second attempt to recover the investment. $20,000. My money. He never asked where it came from. Brian's voice was barely a whisper. "Karen," I turned to Andrew and Chalia, "and when you sat in your study last night, talking about how you're 3 weeks away from losing this house, how your retirement is gone, how you're drowning in debt," their faces crumbled. I heard every word. I let that sink in. "You're on your third mortgage. Your investments failed. You're living on credit and prayers. And you had the audacity to call me dead weight." Aunt Lorraine started crying, actual tears running down her face. "You wanted Brian to marry into wealth to save you," I said, my voice soft but sharp. "But here's the truth. Brian already married wealth. You were just too blind, too proud to see it." I looked around the table. I acted poor so I could see your true selves. I wore cheap clothes and drove an old car and carried this purse you mocked, so I could watch how you treated someone you thought was beneath you. My voice dropped. "Turns out you're the poorest people in this room." Chalia sobbed openly now. "Karen, we didn't know." "You didn't want to know. You wanted someone to look down on, someone to blame, someone to feel superior to." Andrew stood, his hands shaking. "We made a mistake. You made a choice. Every insult, every laugh, every cruel word, those were choices." Brian turned to his parents, his voice breaking. "She saved us. She saved our home, our credit, our lives. And you mocked her. You told me to leave her." "Brian." Chalia reached for him. He stepped back. "No, you don't get to explain this away." I touched his arm gently. "Brian, it's okay. It's not okay, Karen. They treated you like garbage." "I know. But I'm not here for an apology." I looked at his parents. "I'm here so you understand who I really am." I gathered my documents, placed them back in my purse, and stood. I'm a woman who kept her faith, who stayed humble, who used her blessing to help others, even when those others despised her. I looked at Brian. And I'm a woman who deserves better than this. The room was silent, except for Chalia's quiet crying. Brian took my hand. "Let's go home," he said, and we walked out together. We drove back to New Jersey in silence. Brian's hands gripped the steering wheel so tight his knuckles went white. Twice, he started to speak and then stopped, words failing him. Finally, as we pulled into our driveway, he turned to me. "I don't even know where to start, Karen." "Then don't." "Not yet." We sat in the car, my old Corolla that I loved, and watched the sun set over our neighborhood. Our small, simple, beautiful neighborhood. "Why didn't you tell me?" he finally asked. "About the money?" "Because I needed to know you loved me. For me, not for what I could give you." I do love you. I know. But your family. I paused. They almost convinced you otherwise. He closed his eyes. I'm so sorry. Brian, there's something you need to understand. If you want a life with me, a real life, it can't include their pride, their judgment, their cruelty. I know. Do you? Because they're your family, and family is complicated. He turned to me, tears in his eyes. You're my family, Karen. You've been my family through everything. I was too scared to see it. I took his hand. Then we start over. Fresh. Honest. Honest, he repeated. About everything? About everything. The next few months changed us both. I stopped hiding. Not just the money, but myself. I hired a financial advisor, set up a charitable foundation focused on helping families in crisis, anonymously paid off medical debts for families in our church, funded scholarships for kids who couldn't afford college. Brian started therapy, real therapy, working through the shame, the pressure, the years of trying to live up to impossible standards. Our marriage became something new, something honest. We sold the small house not because we had to, but because we wanted to. Bought a slightly bigger one. Nothing extravagant, just comfortable. I still drove my Corolla, still shopped at thrift stores, still wore my floral dresses to church. But now, I did it because I wanted to, not because I was hiding. Brian's parents called 17 times in the first month. We didn't answer. They sent letters. We read them, acknowledged them, but kept our distance. Finally, 3 months later, Andrew showed up at our door. He looked older, tired, broken. I don't expect forgiveness, he said. I just wanted you to know we're selling the house, moving into something smaller, starting over. I nodded. I hope it brings you peace. Karen, what we did was a choice. Your choice. I've forgiven you, but I won't forget. He nodded slowly. That's fair. As he walked back to his car, Brian called after him. Dad? Andrew turned. Good luck. It wasn't much, but it was something. 6 months after that terrible weekend in Boston, I stood in front of our church congregation and shared my testimony. I told them about the lottery, the secret, the journey. I told them about pride and humility, about wealth and poverty, about seeing people's true hearts, and I told them the truth I'd learned. For 2 years, I acted like a poor, naïve wife. I hid my blessing because I was afraid of what it would do to me, to my relationships, to my faith. I paused, looking at the faces around me, faces that had known me long before the money and loved me just the same after. But I learned something important. True wealth isn't in your bank account. It's in your character, in how you treat people when you think no one important is watching, in whether you choose kindness or cruelty, when you have the power to choose. I smiled. I acted poor to see the truth. And the truth was beautiful and heartbreaking all at once. Brian sat in the front row, tears streaming down his face, nodding. But now, I continued, now I'm done pretending. I'm done hiding. I'm stepping into who God called me to be, a woman who uses her blessings to bless others, who loves openly, who lives honestly. I looked at my husband, who chooses grace, even when others choose judgment. After the service, people hugged me, thanked me, told me my story gave them hope. And as Brian and I walked to our car, my beloved beat-up Corolla, he put his arm around me. I'm proud of you, he said. I'm proud of us. We drove home together, the sun setting behind us, and I realized something. For years, I acted like a poor, naive wife. Turns out, I was the richest one in every way that mattered. And now, finally, the whole world knew it too.